to issues of national security this week. A senior Chinese government official demanded that Australia needs to work towards a quick conclusion of a government review into the Port of Darwin's Chinese ownership. The official even sort of mused that tensions between our two countries could be relaxed if they get the right result out of the review, and we might then get the right result in relation to trade sanctions on Australian exports. Well, is that a fair price to pay? Joining me to discuss this now, the Director of Strategic Analysis Australia, Peter Jennings. Well, my read here is that you scratch our back on the Port of Darwin, says Beijing. We might ease our prohibition on your trade. I think this is a dubious deal, but you're the expert, Peter Jennings. What do you make of it?
Well, it really couldn't be clearer that what the Chinese ambassador is saying to Anthony Albanese is if you want your trip to Beijing before the end of the year, you better make the right decision on the Port of Darwin. And so the question that comes to my mind, Peter, is why is our government working so hard to try to bring Australia back into an abusive relationship with China, where, frankly, every political angle is used as a coercive attack against Australian policy interests? We've already heard from the Productivity Commission a couple of days ago that, in fact, the effect of these China's so-called sanctions on a range of commodities was minimal. And in some senses positive, because what it did was that it forced businesses and industries to actually diversify their export destinations. And so why are we now trying to work back from that into a relationship where China is going to be more coercive towards us? Frankly, I think I don't expect this to happen, but what I would like to see is that Anthony Albanese simply shelves this aspiration for a visit to Beijing. Mostly he seems to want to go to commemorate a Whitlam visit from 1972 and instead focus on how we can diversify ourselves economically away from China. Because if we get back into more dependence, it's just going to lead to more abuse.
When you read comments from many areas inside the US administration, the defence area, the national security area, and of course the White House, you read what's being said and analysed in the UK in particular as well. It's not just an American view of the world. They are waking up to China, I think in a way we probably did 4 or 5 years ago. But we now seem to be going back the other way. The point you're making there, that we're bending over backwards to basically excuse bad behaviour from China, their attacks on our sovereignty, their attacks on sovereignty of other countries in the region, their poor behaviour, or we accept probably their poor behaviour in relation to cybersecurity attacks and other things. I think things are getting worse, not better, but we seem desperate to hold the hand of Xi Jinping at the end of the year on their soil as if nothing's happened.
Yes, I agree, Peter. We're paying a really high price for the delivery of a so-called stabilised relationship, which is what Labor likes to say was the thing that they delivered. And of course, all politics is domestic politics. I think a key driver for Labor here is to say, well, we're doing this better than the Morrison government did. And an Albanese trip to China is going to be a key component of that. But the price we're paying for this stabilised relationship is our government cannot talk openly and honestly about the strategic threat that China is presenting to the region, the growth of military power, the increasingly aggressive way that China is using its military forces. And the absurdity that this creates is that at the same time, for example, as we've got the usual visit from a Chinese spy ship to come and spy on exercise Talisman Sabre, we have an Australian Army band at the Chinese embassy a couple of days ago playing the Chinese national anthem while the ambassador gives a speech saying don't do anything on the Port of Darwin. I mean, this is almost cringe-worthily embarrassing.
You're kidding me.
No, I'm not. No, the Australian band from Duntroon was there. And this is, again, as part of, we must get back into military exercises, Peter. Well, I can tell you there was no military value and no intelligence value for us in having a small number of exercises with the People's Liberation Army. They were only ever to serve a political purpose. And the purpose right now is to hide the fact that China is a strategic threat to the security of the democracies. Now, the US realises that, the British realise it, increasingly a large number of Europeans do. But the price we pay for pretending to have a stabilised relationship is Australian governments can't talk about this anymore to the Australian people.
Well, just quickly wrap, if we can, on AUKUS. Two parts to the question. One, I'm interested in this push from the Republican congressmen. There's a band of them that want, before they'll sign off an AUKUS, a rapid increase in their rollout of domestic US submarines. What do you make of that? Is that going to hamper our overall delivery timeframes? And two, despite an offer from Blinken that New Zealand should perhaps think about coming into AUKUS, they've already rejected that pretty quickly. What do you make of that as well?
So on the Republican front, I think we should be concerned about this because the Americans, rightly enough, will look to their own security first. And their argument with Biden is that Biden is actually spending less on defence than he was last year. There is a need for America to ramp up its industrial production. And in order for that not to be a problem for Australia, we need to, I think, show more energy and focus on delivering these submarines than we currently are. For example, our government has kicked into touch beyond the next election a decision relating to where a new East Coast naval base is going to be to house these submarines. We need to be getting on with that. We need to be showing some urgency in order not to give anyone in Congress a sense of, concern about is Australia worth the American support. On the New Zealand point, Peter, I was surprised that Secretary of State Anthony Blinken sort of made it sound like maybe New Zealand could become an AUKUS member because, frankly, in an agreement which focuses on science and technology and industry, New Zealand has almost nothing to bring to the table. And so I was a little pleased to hear that New Zealand Foreign Minister said, well, we're not that interested. Just remember, New Zealand is also saying, well, we're not going to have those Australian nuclear submarines come into our ports because of our anti-nuclear policy. So why reward New Zealand when it has for decades played a very sort of equivocal role, about half in the Western Alliance and half not? I can see no case for New Zealand to be brought into AUKUS cooperation at all.
I think we've carried them for a long time, and I think we have to keep carrying them. I'm with you, Peter Jennings. Thank you for your time.